In 1872, a group of journalists, artists, and musicians in San Francisco formed the Bohemian Club, a private gentlemen's club dedicated to fostering creativity, fellowship, and a love of the arts. The club took its name from the term bohemian, which in the 19th century referred to artists, writers, and musicians who defied social conventions. The club's founders included journalists like Ambrose Bierce, Bret Harte, and Charles Warren Stoddard, as well as artists, musicians, and actors. In 1878, looking for a summer getaway, the club purchased a 160-acre plot of old-growth redwood forest, 75 miles north of San Francisco, near the town of Monte Rio. This became known as the Bohemian Grove, the site of the club's annual summer encampment. The first formal encampment at the Grove was held that same year, with around 100 Bohemians in attendance. In its early decades, the Bohemian Club's membership and the activities at the Grove reflected its artistic roots. Members included writers like Mark Twain, Bret Harte, and Jack London, as well as musicians, actors, and painters. The annual summer encampment was a rustic, informal affair focused on outdoor activities, music, theater, and socializing. Attendees stayed in tents and temporary structures among the towering redwoods. Several traditions that continue to the present day were established early on. This includes the cremation of care ritual, first performed in 1881, where an effigy called Dull Care, symbolizing worldly concerns, is burned in front of a 40-foot concrete owl statue. The owl, a symbol of wisdom and knowledge, was chosen as the club's mascot and is prominently featured in club iconography. Musical and theatrical performances, known as high jinks and low jinks, became a regular feature of the encampments. The high jinks were elaborate, themed productions with original music and scripts, while the low jinks were more informal comedic performances. In 1893, a temporary log structure called the Bohemian Round Table was built, serving as a precursor to the permanent clubhouse built in 1904. As the club grew, it began attracting an increasing number of wealthy businessmen and civic leaders, in addition to artists and writers. Membership expanded beyond San Francisco to include prominent figures from Los Angeles and beyond. By the 1920s, the encampment had grown to several hundred attendees, and the club had constructed permanent structures and stages among the redwoods. The Great Depression and World War II marked a turning point for the Bohemian Club and the Grove. While still maintaining its artistic and fraternal character, the club's membership increasingly shifted towards business executives, bankers, politicians, and military leaders. This change reflected the growing power and influence of these groups in American society. Several U.S. presidents visited the Grove during this period, including Calvin Coolidge and Herbert Hoover. Coolidge gave a lakeside talk in 1923, prior to his presidency, and Hoover visited in 1950. Other notable figures of the era who were members or guests include writer Jack London, industrialist Henry Kaiser, and U.S. Army General Dwight D. Eisenhower, who would later become president. In 1942, the club instituted the tradition of the Lakeside Talks, where a prominent figure is invited to give a speech on issues of national and global importance. The talks are given on the second Friday of the encampment, beside a small lake in the Grove. Over the years, speakers have included numerous U.S. presidents, foreign heads of state, Nobel Prize winners, and titans of industry. Some notable lakeside talks include 1950, Herbert Hoover on the economic future of the United States. 1963, Dwight D. Eisenhower on the future of the United States in world affairs. 1967, Richard Nixon on America's role in the emerging world. 1981, Alexander Haig on foreign policy in the Reagan era. 1991, Helmut Schmidt on the New World Order. As the club's membership and guest list increasingly included highly influential figures, the Bohemian Grove began to attract more scrutiny and controversy. Some saw the gathering as an opportunity for business and political elites to make connections and discuss important issues away from public view. Others viewed the Grove with suspicion, speculating about what powerful people might be planning in secret. The Bohemian Club and the Grove gained wider public attention in the 1970s and 80s. Journalists and activists began to focus on the gathering's secrecy and its high-powered attendees. In 1971, left-wing activist Philip Weiss infiltrated the Grove and wrote about his experience for Rolling Stone, describing the cremation of care ritual in detail. Weiss's article sparked further interest in the club's activities. Increased media scrutiny in the 1980s and 90s brought the Bohemian Grove further into the public eye. In 1989, the Spy magazine article, Masters of the Universe Go to Camp, provided a rare insider account of the encampment. Several hidden camera exposés were conducted, most notably by radio host Alex Jones in 2000, who filmed the cremation of care ritual and raised the club's profile among conspiracy theorists. Protesters from across the political spectrum began staging demonstrations and counter-gatherings outside the Grove during the summer retreats. Left-wing groups like the Bohemian Grove Action Network criticized the gathering as an elitist consolidation of power and a venue for shady backroom deals. Right-wing figures like Alex Jones and Mark Dice alleged that occult activities and even human sacrifice were occurring inside the Grove, though no credible evidence has ever emerged to support these claims. Another major controversy involved the Grove itself. Starting in the 1980s, environmental activists opposed the Bohemian Club's logging of old-growth redwoods on the property. The club argued that its logging practices were sustainable and necessary for reducing fire risk, but activists accused them of exploiting the Grove's resources for commercial gain. A long-running battle ensued, involving multiple lawsuits and protests by groups like Earth First and the Bohemian Grove Action Network. After years of conflict, the club agreed to end commercial logging in 2007. Over the years, the Bohemian Club has counted many highly influential figures among its members and guests. U.S. presidents known to have visited the Grove include Theodore Roosevelt, Calvin Coolidge, Herbert Hoover, Dwight Eisenhower, Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, Ronald Reagan, George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Donald Trump prior to his presidency. Several of these presidents were members of the club, while others were invited guests. Other notable politicians who have been members or guests include Henry Kissinger, former U.S. Secretary of State, Dick Cheney, former U.S. Vice President, Colin Powell, former U.S. Secretary of State, Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, Antonin Scalia, former U.S. Supreme Court Justice, Earl Warren, former U.S. Supreme Court Chief Justice, Helmut Schmidt, former Chancellor of West Germany, Caspar Weinberger, former U.S. Secretary of Defense. Business titans who have been associated with the club include Henry Ford, founder of Ford Motor Company, Andrew Carnegie, steel magnate and philanthropist, William Randolph Hearst, newspaper publisher and media tycoon, David Rockefeller, banker and philanthropist, Walter Cronkite, broadcast journalist, Jack Dorsey, co-founder and CEO of Twitter. From the arts and entertainment world, notable members have included Mark Twain, writer, Ambrose Bierce, writer and journalist, Bret Hart, writer and poet, Jack London, writer, Will Rogers, humorist and actor, Douglas Fairbanks, actor and filmmaker, Charlie Chaplin, actor and filmmaker, Art Linkletter, radio and television personality. Today, the Bohemian Club has around 2,000 members, and the annual July encampment typically attracts several thousand attendees. The waiting list for membership is said to be around 15 years long. Members pay sizable initiation fees, reportedly $25,000, and annual dues, around $10,000. The encampment now lasts for 2 weeks, with events and activities occurring throughout that period. Talks, performances, and rituals like the cremation of care continue, alongside outdoor pursuits and socializing. Members and guests are assigned to different camps within the Grove, each with its own theme, history, and traditions. The club maintains a highly private and exclusive atmosphere, with tight security and a strict prohibition on cameras, recording devices, and uninvited guests. Cell phones and other electronic devices are banned, and attendees are encouraged to engage in face-to-face conversation and enjoy the natural surroundings. Despite the club's efforts to maintain privacy, interest, and controversy surrounding the Bohemian Grove persist, the gathering continues to be a magnet for protesters and a subject of speculation and conspiracy theory. For many, the Grove embodies long-standing questions about power, elitism, and what happens when the world's most influential people congregate behind closed doors. At the same time, the club and its members argue that the Grove serves a valuable purpose as a retreat from the pressures of public life and a forum for the free exchange of ideas. They point to the Grove's long history of artistic expression and intellectual discourse, and emphasize that the encampment is primarily a social and recreational event. As the Bohemian Club moves into the 21st century, it faces the challenge of maintaining its traditions and privacy in an age of increasing transparency and public scrutiny. The Grove remains a unique and storied institution, one that continues to capture the imagination and raise questions about power and privilege in American society. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell icon. Thanks for watching History Reforged.